Hello and welcome to Digital Technologies for Agri-Food Chains, High Potential Critical Gaps. We are talking about the potential of these technologies and of course the gaps that still remain in how they are being developed and how they're being applied. This panel discussion is being organized by the Leibniz Research Alliance Food and Nutrition and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, better known as the OECD. And we have representatives from both of those organizations with us here this morning to offer you some words of welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, Rainer Brunch, he's speaker of the Leibniz Research Alliance Sustainable Food Production and Healthy Nutrition, and Frank von Tongeren, head of the Policies in Trade and Agriculture Division at the OECD. Rainer, first.
Thank you very much, and good morning and welcome from me as a speaker of the Research Alliance. And I'm really happy that we discuss not only about digitalization in connection with agriculture, so that we want to try together to discuss the whole food chain. And this is important because most of the people are involved, nearly everybody is involved in this process. And that is not so very clear as we realize in our discussions with the society, that is not in the brain of everybody. And let us try to bring it there. And so I'm really happy that we could organize together with the OECD this interesting panel, and I'm thank from our position the panelists for coming here and having presenting their ideas to speak about the options, the side effects and the risks, and then to find a good conclusion for the end of the day. And I'm sure that with the help of digitalization we can improve the quality and quantity of information management in future. Thank you for coming.
And Frank von Tongeren from the OECD.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Terry, and the panelists for being here. I'm looking forward to a very interesting discussion today. Okay, so I had one picture only. Just for the benefit of the one or two in the room who may not actually know what the OECD is, let me tell you what we are. We are an intergovernmental organization, meaning governments are working together. 36 members we have. Working on very many policy areas, essentially everything that's economic and social. Our approach is very much evidence-based, consensual and peer reviewing. And we from the Secretariat, so people like me, like Gwen, but also Shivani, support the policy dialogue between our members and increasingly also with non-members by providing that evidence and research. So we're working on a lot of policy areas, including digital. So there's a huge program in the OECD looking into the digital economy writ large. But also in agriculture and food we're doing something. And just to highlight the three main streams that we're dealing with. The first one has to do with traceability in some sense. So the idea that digital-enabled traceability could help consumers, informing consumers, could also help to connect consumers to environmental features of the product they're consuming. We're looking into value chain transparency, but also issues like food safety and international trade, so under the heading of traceability. But since we are a policy outfit, our main interest is in policy making, so we look also into how digital technologies could help improve policy making, agricultural policy making in particular in the area of agri-environmental policies, to make those policies more targeted and cost efficient. Shivani will talk to us today about another aspect of our work that's more closely related to industry, that's corporate social responsibility, and see how digital technologies actually could help businesses in that area. That's not directly government policy, but more indirectly government policy, because there's often the corporate social responsibility agenda coincides with public research and public policy agenda as well. So just by way of a quick introduction of what we're doing in that space, you see there's a lot. If you're interested, of course, there are all these papers that we're producing that you may be able to find on our website. But in general, I'm looking very much forward to this discussion today, and as was said earlier, we think it's very important to have a supply chain perspective in this area of digitalization of agriculture and food. So, kick off, Terry.
Just a few words that I'm going to say to introduce things, and we'll get going immediately because we want to use our time in the most valuable way we can. My name, by the way, is Terry Martin. I'm a news anchor with Deutsche Welle, that's Germany's international broadcasting service, also known as DW. It's really a great honor for me to be here today with such distinguished company to talk about a topic of such universal importance, and it's great to have all of you here too. Nearly 500 people actually registered for this session from over 70 countries. I'm glad that so many of you have made it into the room. I have a feeling there are some outside who didn't quite make it, so you're being rewarded for being here on time. Shows also just how much interest there is in our topic and in our speakers. It's easy to see why this interest is there. Digital technologies are obviously already affecting the way we produce, sell, transport, and consume agricultural products, and that impact is increasing fast with massive implications for food security, the environment, global trade, economic development, and health. So what a privilege it is to have with us 5 leading experts who can help us understand both the positive potential and the possible pitfalls of these technologies in the agri-food sphere. Before I introduce our speakers, just a quick overview of the session, what to expect. There are 3 parts. First, the panelists will each have 5 minutes to state their key interests and concerns in relation to our topic. That should cover about 25 or 30 minutes. Then we'll get the discussion rolling up here for another half hour. After that, it's your turn, so be ready. We'll have whatever time is left until 11:45 for questions from the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce our panel of experts. From your left to right. Here next to me, Cornelia Weltzien of Germany is head of the Engineering for Crop Production Department at the Leibniz Institute for Agricultural Engineering and Bioeconomy. She's also a professor of that. Just after her, we have Sean Thomas of the UK. She's head of Data Information Governance and Security at the UK Food Standards Agency. Next, Shivani Kanabirian, is I knew I was going to trip over that, is a policy advisor responsible for business conduct at the OECD, and she is based in Paris. Hermann Lotze-Kampen is a professor for sustainable land use and climate change and head of the Climate Impacts and Vulnerabilities Department at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. That's just south of Berlin here. And Diane Tayan is Director of Consumer Safety and Traceability at the Global Office of the Standards Association GS1, based in Brussels. So, a warm hand for all of our panelists, first of all.
So, we are working since 20 years, even more than 20 years, on developing sensors for agriculture, for crop production. So we're trying to understand what the soil's potential is. We're trying to understand what the plant actually needs to feed the demand of the plant and to work the soil according to its potential. And we do so by applying the highest technology that we can get a hold of. So we're trying to extract all this information by applying sensors. We have started that, giving it the name of precision agriculture, like I said, almost 20 years ago now. And we are just logically following up this path by adding new methods coming in from the data science side. So now we are applying methods of artificial intelligence, of machine learning, to drag just more information out of the environment to produce or to manage our primary production in the field or in the barns according to the needs and according to the demand. So this is basically our bottom line that we have been working on for the past and we are going to work on in the future. The big step that lies ahead right now is that in the past 20 years we have produced a lot of information, but the information management and actually the analysis of the information has been very complex and added more tasks, more hours for the farmers in front of the computer. Right now, we are at the verge of applying intelligent systems which hopefully will manage or will help us manage our very, very complex systems in a simpler, intuitive way so that we can reduce the amount of hours that the farmer has to spend in front of the computer by applying these new intelligent, artificial intelligent systems. So this is why it is at the moment really a revolutionary step within the evolution of developing information-based, demand-driven agriculture.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you very much. We'll be exploring some of those issues, I'm sure, when we get to it, particularly the idea of moving from a situation where now farmers are faced with additional tasks that may actually slow them down instead of improve their efficiency. So achieving greater efficiency is obviously a goal. Okay.
So the Food Standards Agency is a UK body responsible for food safety and authenticity. And rather than tell you about our remit and what we're doing, I thought I'd give you some examples of our recent work. You can ask me about other things that we're engaged with too, if that's useful in the discussion. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is, well, if we have these digital technologies, what can we actually do that's different? So this shows you an overview of the way that we're doing strategic surveillance at the moment. We're identifying issues that have become apparent through work that we've done on food safety. We take a pilot and we run it through this process. So we look at what the data tells us, we look at whether we could predict this incident in the future, and then we go ahead and try to predict what might happen. So a specific example of this that I'd like to share with you is about looking at aflatoxin. So the RASFF system, which is a means by which the European Union communicates food safety issues to member states, has quite a number of aflatoxin issues from nuts imported to the EU from Turkey. It's one of the most prevalent disease issues in imported food, and we looked at why this might be, identified that it's to do with the climate where those nuts are grown, and then we've looked at whether we can predict future outbreaks or incidents of aflatoxin in those nuts. And we're actually getting to the stage where not only can we predict this in Turkey, but we can also start to predict it in other areas where there are similar climatic conditions. We've been running these pilots now for just over a year, and we've got a list that I'd be very happy to share with you of things that we've tried across a whole range of different types of food incident. And it is using the digital data that the improved technology makes available to predict future incidents. And this is why using digital technology is important. Using the technology has benefits throughout the food chain, but it's not only the food chain where it does have that impact. Actually, if you're a consumer, it has a real impact for you because it means that we can target food recalls so that only the products that are affected by the incident are recalled, rather than doing blanket recalls as we have in the past. A second case study that I thought I could share with you is one that we've been running for just over 9 months now, and that's looking at using blockchain technology in a small component of the red meat supply chain in order to be able to identify the conditions in the abattoir and send them to all of the farmers that were part of rearing that animal. This is really important because those cows often go through many different farms before they arrive at the abattoir. And in the UK, the way that that is regulated is across a number of different government departments. So really, we're using blockchain technology to provide transparency across the supply chain in a way that ensures that all of the actors in that chain get some value from the technology. You can see that we didn't change the process significantly in the way that we employed this technology, that we took the existing means and we just added in a different data transfer mechanism at the early stage. We've been running this for 9 months now, and we've got quite a bit of insight that we previously didn't have. So this slide shows the different numbers of farms that the cows have been to before they get to the abattoir. Why is that important? Well, because of the way that traceability works in the food supply chain, you only need to know where the animal came from and where the animal went to. So having this information as an end-to-end chain provides additional insight when it comes to animal disease. And in particular, it provides real insight when looking at a condition that's quite prevalent in the UK, liver fluke. So liver fluke occurs in a significant proportion of animals, and while it doesn't have any food safety implications, it does mean that the animal produces less yield for the feed inputs that you have. It also means that farmers are able to target the drugs that they use to reduce this disease in their animals. This is live data, and this was taken from November last year. The pilot's been running now for just over 9 months, so we're collecting data on all of the conditions that we routinely monitor, and we're starting to get analysis back to show how the distribution of the disease impacts the feed regimes and drug regimes in those animals. You can see here that the locations of liver fluke, just shown in the same data as the previous slide in a different map. And this is relevant because we did think that a lot of the liver fluke was prevalent in the west of the UK. This is the one that shows where the animals were moved in their life course. This shows the locations of the animals that had the disease in the UK. And this is interesting because we did think that liver fluke was associated with animals that were reared in the west of the country. You can see from this graph that particularly in the north, where the abattoirs that are involved in the pilot are, it doesn't seem to be the case that actually animals on the east are equally impacted. But you can see there's a real farm-to-farm variation. So this slide shows that the two farms involved in one part of the early part of this pilot, there's actually no incidence of liver fluke on one of those farms, which we thought was really interesting, and it shows that the control measures that you can put in place are really, really effective. So that just gives you a small snippet of two of the trials that we've been running that make use of some of the digital technologies. There are some others, so do ask me about them in the discussion. Thank you very much.
It works? Oh, yes, it does. Good morning, everybody. Guten Morgen, and I will speak in English. So my name is Shivani Kanabir, and I work at the OECD, as Frank mentioned. And the area I work in actually is in the Division of Investment, which is part of our Directorate of Financial and Enterprise Affairs. And that's just important just to situate it. So I work a lot with businesses, and one of the key areas is in this idea of responsible business conduct. And one aspect that's very important for us, of course, we expect companies to pay their taxes, compete fairly, but there's a growing demand for supply chain due diligence. And this is the area that we find technology could potentially have some really important and positive ramifications. Supply chain due diligence, when we talk about that, we're really talking about the entire value chain of the agri-business industry. So I'm talking about from input suppliers, farmers, producers, food, beverage, traders, and then food, beverage manufacturers, up until retailers. And our standards and policies, which are developed together with governments, but also businesses, unions, as well as civil society. The idea is to look at a wide range of risks. And this is an important question for many of us as consumers, for example. You want to understand where it is your food is coming from, but not just the provenance. You're also asking questions on how has this food been produced. And this is important because I think the first speaker from the Leibniz Institute mentioned this idea of the SDGs are something that we all need to take on board and really seriously. We know we need to get food production up by about 60% by 2050. We know that we've got limited land, and we also know that we want to reach certain goals such as decent working conditions, rights of women. So how do we manage all of this? How do we produce sustainably and consume sustainably? So that's the work that we're looking at. In terms of digital technology, we see that, and I'm going to talk about DLT and short form blockchain, let's say. We see that there are really important aspects where this technology can actually bring much more transparency, because right now the supply chain works where information is passed along the supply chain, typically by documents and paper. And as Sharon pointed out, there's really technology has a way to actually make this more real time, give you benefits to detailed information, and depending on where you are in the supply chain, you can potentially access that. So that's very strong. The concerns, though, and these are concerns, this is all pioneering technology, so we do need to really do research and understand what are some of, and I think these are the unintended consequences that hopefully we'll get to as well. And these include things like, if the data that goes in is not good, this is the typical garbage in, you get garbage out. So, and the immutable aspect of blockchain is one of those issues. The other question that we do ask is, because when we talk about risk, we're looking at a whole range of risk, not just the product quality, which is very important, but also, as I said, these conditions under which it was manufactured or grown. And there, it's less simple. So questions like child labor or modern slavery, how do you take that type of information and put it onto the blockchain? Technology can be an enabler and a helpful aspect, but what we're seeing, and we've been talking to different groups that are working on these technologies across a range of sectors, not just agriculture, because this is really agnostic to the sector. Yeah? We find that there's still, I would say, the first mile part, of the chain. You still need a lot of human interaction at that point. But having said that, what we are seeing is that the technology can be a real game changer in the aspects of, I'd say, traceability, efficiency, transparency. Also, we haven't talked about it, but smart contracts. So this is where, as a small, and SMEs are a big part, will benefit from something like this. Where, when you, payment terms, for example, smart contracts are sort of self-facilitating payments, where then the question of your working capital is no longer tied up in your payment terms. So this can again smoothen out the trading in the supply chain. I guess some of the points of concern, do you want me to cover that now, Terry?
If you could do it within 30 seconds or so, that'd be great.
Well, 1 minute, okay. So let's think about traceability as a means to an end and not the only reason why we should do it. Let's also think of some of the interoperability aspects. For example, most companies will need to look at a wide range of commodities. So what we're seeing right now is that groups are coming up looking at very specific commodity chains. So we need to make sure that those groups can actually, the data can speak to each other, because if that doesn't happen, the business case falls apart. We also need to think about technology as enabling inclusiveness and not entrenching barriers. So if folks are not already part of the system, of the market system, will technology leave them further behind? And this is an important point, because when we're talking about agriculture, particularly in developing countries, this is a big part of many developing countries' economy. So we need to make technology that's also usable and adaptable to that. I'll leave it at that, but very pleased to be here, and thank you.
Shivani, thank you so much. You already gave us a lot to think about. Thank you very much. Helen.
Yes, thank you very much. So let me add a bit more in a similar direction. So I'm an agricultural economist, and with my working group at the Potsdam Institute, we are developing long-term computer-based scenarios on how the agriculture and food sector may develop in the future. And I mean, we all know that the agricultural sector and food sector will face significant challenges in the future. Some were already mentioned. If it was only about providing enough food, I wouldn't be too worried, but we have all kinds of issues about resource constraints. Agriculture will need to work under changing climate conditions, so emissions have to be reduced from agriculture. And of course we have limits in resources in terms of water, land, and also of course we want to preserve natural environments, biodiversity, etc. So we have multiple goals which are now well reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals, which also requires of course a complex set of policies to implement these goals. And the question is, how can the agriculture and food sector possibly evolve within these numbers or many constraints in the future? And this applies to any country, any location, but of course for the global system. So trade is obviously also an important aspect in this, and very important also to meet some of these challenges. And in my view, and what our scenarios show, and I can elaborate on that later, is in effect we need any technology we can get, whether it's improved soil management, advancing existing agricultural technologies, breeding, advanced versions of breeding, but also all kinds of digital technologies. Because within these constraints, for example, labor shortage in rural areas and shortage of qualified labor will be a serious issue for many farmers in the future. So all kinds of issues where I think many different digital technologies which are currently emerging, and we can already see the potential, are useful and are necessary. I want to give just 3 examples. One on nitrogen. Nitrogen surpluses is a huge problem in many agricultural systems. Just yesterday a new study in Germany was published about premature deaths from air pollution caused basically by ammonia emissions from agriculture. Then there is water. Everyone knows that agriculture is a huge water user. Water shortage, precision irrigation and managing water resources is very important. And then there is carbon, so storing more amounts of carbon within agricultural systems, increasing soil carbon has huge potential, but there's lots of issues about measuring, monitoring and verification, and I think new types of sensors and so on could play a role in here. And then there are many more. And in the end, and that was already mentioned, consumers in the end want to know where their food comes from, how it has been produced, and whether all these goals are actually being met, in addition to the policymakers, of course. So I see here huge potentials, but we should also, of course, mention, and I guess we'll discuss that, all these new technologies have to be harnessed and regulated in a way, because I'm not an expert in these technology issues, but ownership of data, how to manage these huge amounts of new data coming from all kinds of sensors already routinely being used in agricultural machinery. It has to be regulated, data ownership, data safety, and so on. I think we have to pick up early on in the discussion, because otherwise this may also cause a backlash against some of these technologies. So I leave it at that for the moment. Thank you.
Good morning. So I will focus on how to enable, all the potential applications that we have already heard, and then in the discussions, I guess we can further discuss. So imagine that instead of being here, each of us would be in different places. And for example, Terry would expect that we would do this conference by video conference. He has a nice video conferencing room with proper camera, etc. Then Cornelia would expect to do that with her computer, by Skype or whatever, with the video. And then Xian would like to do that with her smartphones. And Shivani, maybe you only have a phone, okay, with no internet. And Herman, maybe you live in a remote place, you know, in the mountains, in the jungle, that you even don't have need a phone access or internet. That's not going to work, we know it, right? Now, imagine on the top of that you would speak Russian, okay? Then another one would speak Japanese, another one would expect to speak maybe Pygmy, you know, and another one French, another one Spanish. It would really not work. Now, maybe the one in French and Spanish, they would understand enough each other to misunderstand them, right? Because they would understand only half of it. So we know it doesn't work. We would never have the idea of doing that. But that's what we face every day in the supply chain. Every day. Because in order to have really transparency in the chain, or visibility, or traceability, whatever the word, it's not exactly the same, but overall, in order to have access to information about the products and their supply chain, where they come from, where they have been, how they have been produced, where they have gone, how they have been used, and all the following products maybe that they became, processed food, you know, for example. In order to have this, let's call it transparency maybe, we need to be able to access to data that are actually spread across the chain. Because the data about a product are spread about the many stakeholders involved in the chain. Part of the data, the farmer, the fisherman has it. Okay? Part of the data may be a packing house, a wholesaler, distributor, a retailer. But each of them, they use different technologies. Maybe one is starting to use blockchain. Maybe one is using EDI to share information. Maybe another one is just sharing, you know, via Excel sheet with internet. He's not very technology mature. He wants to do that. One is using SAP, another one another software. One is using barcodes, another one would like to use RFID, etc. Okay. Now, even if they use the same technology, they probably have different solution providers. They don't use the exact same tool. So the point is they need to use a common language. We need to enable, we need to enable systems, tools to connect to each other, to talk to each other. So in order to do that, we need a common language, just like we need a common language to communicate. Okay? And that's actually what we do, what we have been created for at GS1. So we are a standard body, which has been created 40 years ago, with already the same goal. At that time, that was different, but there were some visionary CEOs of big companies who started to use computers in the 70s, and they thought, wow, you know, we always exchange the same type of information. Why don't we agree on a common language so we can automate our exchange and our process and avoid typing, retyping the information, recapturing all the time, avoiding all these mistakes. You know, if we type and we know that there is one error in typing every 500 characters. So we've been created for that. We are not for profit, by the way. We are neutral, we are global, and GS1 standards are used by more than 1 million companies in the chain. So they're really the most used standards in the chain, used a bit everywhere. And so indeed, 40 years ago, what was different? You know, it was the same need. But today, what has happening is the acceleration of digitalization, the scale and the complexity. Because it's really everybody wants to be connected. But also, we have more and more technologies. We always have new ones. We had RFID a few years ago, now we have blockchain. New technologies don't replace the old ones. We still live with the old ones. So we need to organize the dialogue between even tools, you know, knowing people will use different technologies. And what else I would like to tell you? Yes, the other thing. To enable tools to talk, we need to talk. We need indeed to agree then on how we're going to do it. We need to enable the ecosystem with collaboration, you know, analyzing what are the needs, constraints from each other, capacity building, supporting implementation everywhere, which we also, do a little bit, but this is something we have to do really collaboratively. That's what I wanted to share for now.
Great. And thank you for being so disciplined with the time, too. We still have plenty of time left for what I hope will be a lively, dynamic, and informing discussion. You mentioned one thing, Diane, about the CEOs, visionary CEOs, who had an idea of how the future might evolve. I'm going to put this question to the panel as my very first question. It is the vision question, looking to ahead. When we talk about digital technologies and agri-food chains, what is your vision for digitizing agri-food chains in a way that benefits everybody, producers and consumers, people in the rich world, companies in the rich world, and people and small companies just getting started in the developing world? What's your vision for how that is going to happen, how you would like to see that happen, what you think is realistic, and how we're going, just first of all, that vision. Cornelia, start with you.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Terry. Sorry.
I hear you well, but maybe the people in the back don't. Yeah, yes. Microphone's great.
Let's use the technology available. That's about it, right? Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for that question. I mean, the vision that we have in the chain here, I'm always looking at it from the perspective of the primary production of the biomass. So.
You also have industry experience, too.
I also have industry experience in the sector of agricultural machinery, so this is why my vision always starts at the very beginning of the value chain. So what is our vision? We want to make primary production more sustainable. We want to feed the world with growing demands in a changing climate. So we have heard about these challenges, and our answer from the technology side, from the engineering side, is we understand in a very small scale the demand of the environment, and we can give an answer, and we can manage in very small areas exactly to the demand of the plant to grow to the fullest potential of each hectare or even square meter out there in the field. So we actually can produce more from the same field in the future by applying less chemicals, by applying less input resources, and at the same time keeping the natural resources in place for future generations to come. So the technology that we will use there is, like I said before, sensor technology, data analysis, and also the feedback from the whole value chain coming back as input information in the primary production.
So you're very optimistic that we'll be able to apply those technologies that are coming on stream in a way that will allow us to meet the demands, first of all, just plain food production, because you're working very much on the production side. Shivani mentioned that by 2050 we need to have increased food production by 60% to meet global demand. Do you think that's a realistic thing that we can do with the technologies that are coming online, first of all?
It's an extremely challenging task, and I can't guarantee you today that by applying all the technology that we have, that we will reach that goal. And I want to make one other point here, that technology alone is not the answer. I like to point it out like artificial intelligence is very stupid. We are the ones who define, who program the algorithm. We are the ones who define the content of artificial intelligence. It's just a tool to ease up things, to make things that are difficult for us but easy for a computer, to make them more easy to use.
Diane, I think, made a good point about that too, saying at the end of her presentation that we need to talk to each other. It's about the people who design this and implement it, that it requires communication on that side as well.
Yes, and also in the sense of the technology, we're talking so much, and I'm glad that it has been mentioned before, but we are talking about things like blockchain technology. I'm an engineer, and I'm telling you, let's not talk about blockchain. Let's talk about what do we need to do, and I'm very thankful, Diane, for this very lively example. We need to talk about communication. We need to talk about closing the value chain, giving information from one step to the other. I don't know if there's anybody here in the room who ever used SAP and two enterprises connected via the automated communication. And the point is, you cannot tamper the information anymore. The second point is, you cannot actually interface it at all once you put it in. So garbage in, garbage out means once you set one piece of information, it's going to be there until the end of the lifetime. You
Okay.
made a mistake, no possibility to change it ever. So let's not talk about the technology so much that we are going to apply, because I'm very, very sure in a few years' time we will have blockchain 5.0. And so it's not about which technology to use, but what do we want to do? What do we want to achieve?
Very good, Cornelia. Those are great points, which I think that several people on the panel would be interested in responding to. Shivani, I'd like to bring you in first if you want. If you look a bit startled, you're not obliged to talk about the vision. I want to bring you in because you did offer a rather large, sweeping notion in your presentation about some of the challenges that we're facing. Cornelia mentioned the gaps in the technology. When we talk about the vision question, applying these digital technologies to the agri-food chains, when you look to the future, what do you see coming in the pipeline? Some people are very apprehensive about what all of this means, even though it may have some regular promise. What's your vision for the future in this context?
Look, I think I'm generally positive about technology, but I think we need to also be reasonable and practical about what are the limits and what's it fit for. I think that question of what do we want to achieve, and then coming up with technology or working with technology that's fit for purpose. Because there's no point, if you need to get from point A to B and you can use a bicycle, there's no need necessarily to get a Lamborghini. So, I think that sort of question needs to be answered. In terms of the vision, look, the visions, we've got lots of different visions. The OECD's vision is better policies for better lives, and I link that really back again to the Sustainable Development Goals. It's pretty much agreed, that's what we need to do. So that's our vision. How is it that we can work together? Personally, my view, having worked in this area of supply chain due diligence and worked in different sectors, including the mineral sector, working in countries like the DRC, Rwanda, Uganda, so also working in China, developing countries, developed countries in the OECD, we also need to really collaborate. So collaboration is going to be really critical in this question of talking to each other very simply. But also, and I think this personally, it's being wary about tunneling down in a particular direction without getting the perspectives of a wide range of people who are going to be affected, impacted. And I think that's important. I think that's a role that as governments, and of course at the OECD we work with governments, so we take that very seriously, and I think that's important for us to keep that front and center, to make sure that the different voices are heard. And that we stick with this vision of a better world, very frankly. I mean, that to me, it sounds naive, but that's the vision.
Okay, so that's a bit on the vision. We already, I'm going to ask Diane now to comment from her perspective, because we are talking about the technologies, how we can apply the technologies in a way that's going to allow us to fulfill our vision of a future that is sustainable, that does provide benefits to consumers and producers and to the rich world, to the developing world. But Diane, let me ask you, just how close are we to agreeing on common standards that will allow us to bridge those gaps that you so beautifully illustrated in your presentation?
So actually, we already have most of the standards we need. That's the good news. Okay, so we have, and that's the most important actually. I know a lot of people look at us like barcodes, organization, but the most important before the barcodes or the way you will exchange or capture information is the information in itself. Okay, it starts with how do you name or identify a product, or how do you identify an actor. Okay, so there are well-established standards to identify a product and an actor. So that's a 13-digit that is unique globally, and then this is used for every application. It can be to order a product, it can be for an invoice, it can be in traceability, it can be to access information about certificates, sustainable practices, whatever. And just to give an example indeed of what. For me, it's an example of what may come more and more is what the ITC, is doing. You would know it. I think people should know it. The International Trade Center. They have built a sustainability map, okay, where they enable the farmers and it's for the customers as well, but to have visibility on let's say the players in the supply chain. And the good practices that they have, or the certificates, for example, they have on good agricultural practices. And the way they identify, indeed, the farmers as much as possible and all the stakeholders in the chain is the GLN, the Global Location Number, the global standards for that. And I think the more people do that, the more it will enable to connect with other tools who also have information about this.
Okay, so you're saying the standards are actually there. Most of the standards are there. They're evolving. But so can we say, well, we have what we need, we'll continue to refine them, or are they being really used?
Okay, so maybe still I would like to finish on what standards I think is important. So indeed the identifiers, that's what you should look at all the time, really, first. And then standards to capture information like barcodes and RFID, for example. The classic barcode, the 2D barcodes, there are standards for that. And what's new, for example, is the GS1 digital link. So it's on the way, it's not finished, it's one which is under development. It will enable for any product to connect with any information which is available on the web for this product. Now, what's the difference with Google or something? It will be information that is really structured, saying, publishing on the web, I have information on the where it was grown, on the production conditions, result of the labs, on a TV ad, recipes, nutrition information, okay? And it will be in an open manner, because you can do it today, there are many apps, of course, where you scan the barcode, you access to information, but these are proprietary closed apps. You can only use this one.
That's just it.
In the future, you can do it, and then you will be able to access to anybody who has published information. And you can make your own profile of what you want to know about. I'm interested more in nutritional information. Okay, so I will get more about that. So that is coming now.
But let me ask you then, do you see any danger of these closed systems that you just described, like a closed app, maybe holding up the potential for sharing the benefits, balancing the benefits between different parts of the world and between consumers and producers? Or do you see us all agreeing on, we're not going to end up with a situation where we have some limited proprietary technologies that are only accessible to
yes, and you have to extend that to data sharing as well, okay, where we also have standards, GS1. GS1 will really focus on the data standards, but you also have like the more technical standards. Blockchain is in a way you have the technical standards, then you still need to know or agree what you will exchange and how you will express it. And this is a danger, indeed, Okay. When you were talking about the vision for the future, I was not sure if your question was about the ideal vision or the vision we really think will happen. But
there are horror visions out there. There are lots of different visions.
Ideally, really, I think everybody here would agree that normally every operator in the chain and authorities, obviously, or any association should be able to choose the tool that they want on the market, right? And the technology they want, that will fit them the best. But today what happens in the trend, if we don't, act to facilitate in another way, is that there are a lot of vendor-locked situations, where the operator cannot change because it was a closed system. Or the strongest in the chain impose the tool.
We definitely want to avoid technology lock, where we get locked into something that is not going to be accessible and available for everyone to share those benefits. We heard an example already from Sean of how technologies are being used to achieve greater transparency in the production systems that carry, basically from farm to fork, if you were to extend that all the way. So it's working, at least in certain areas and geographies. I want to bring Herman in here when we're talking, because now we're getting towards talking about implementing some of these technologies, and I'd like to think about the impacts, not just like on our ability to produce food efficiently, feed the world, and share the benefits, but the broader impacts. When we talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, we talk, this is a very, very broad mix of policy goals, but it includes stuff that you're working on. Agriculture has a huge impact on the environment and on the climate. What do you see in terms of what your research is showing you about what the trajectory, what the vectors are in this sector and the implications for your policy areas?
Yeah, thank you. And this links nicely to my two aspects of the vision, actually. We already mentioned a number of challenges which are out there and about the potential of some of the new technologies we are seeing and see emerging. My vision on this has two parts. The more technical one is about integration, and the broader one is about transparency. So the integration part, I think is very interesting. I recently talked with some technology people from a big company, and if you take the example of precision farming, I mean, we are talking about technologies along agri-food value chain, right? So even in parts of this, if you talk about precision farming, you can link information from yield sensors from your combine, you can combine it with remote sensing or satellite data, you can create yield maps on your field, and then you can steer your machinery for spatially explicit application and so on. So this has been around for basically 20-25 years already. I mean, I worked in that area before. It sounded very nice, and it principally works. The problem is, and one of the colleagues last week told me, if you have this chain of technologies, if one part is missing, the whole system doesn't work. So you need this integration along the chain, and this applies even further if you go down through, food processing and all that. Some of the things were mentioned. So standards are important, but also these technology standards, and really making sure that this chain of technologies works. Otherwise, this will not be applied, and in the end, it has to be even cost-effective for farmers, for business, and so on. If it's too expensive, it will not be picked up. So this issue is of integration that we need to take care that to raise the potential very early on. The integration across the chain or along the chain has to be assured. And then the broader vision is about transparency, and this links to the multiple goals we want to pursue. The good thing about the Sustainable Development Goals is that no one, in my view, can now say anymore, sustainability, I don't really know what that is. No, if you look at these 17 goals and the indicators, I mean, there's still work to be done, but it's pretty clear what the targets are, what the indicators are.
And they've been defined for each specific country.
Yeah, and it's really relatively clear. It can be improved, but still, it's suitable for policy making. So we can actually create a system of targets which can be used for creating transparency within the system, but also enabling governance and policy measures. What my vision would be that actually through new sensors and this whole information processing, agricultural primary production, but also processing and so on, contamination, all that can be made very transparent from the primary producer through to the supermarket location. And this will help consumers to know what they are buying in the end in a complex value chain. But if this information is collected, it can also be used for regulation. If you know what the nitrogen balance of a farm is, or if you know what the specific water use is, and this is being made transparent, it can also be used for policy making. But on the other hand, so this would be the grand vision. With this in place, I think there's lots of potential to meet multiple goals. But the flip side is, of course, the whole issue of, as we mentioned, data safety, data ownership, and all that. I guess that has to be solved in other sectors as well. This is not specific to this case. But this, of course, has to be assured to make sure that we don't do any damage.
Okay, thank you, Herman. I know that we picked up, we've got a lot of things, we've opened up a lot of different cans of worms here, as it were. And I'd like to bring you in, Sean, to talk about it from your perspective, and because we're beginning to talk also about regulation, about governance, about what this means for individual governments and global governance when we're trying to apply this. So without putting any specific question to you, I'm going to let you comment on what we've already had.
Okay, so if you think about vision, I think in the tech space, what we're looking for is having standards that work and are completely agnostic of that technology. Because as soon as you start mandating technology, you're locked in, just by mandating a technology. So I spoke about blockchain, and blockchain is just an example, and in that case, it's a good example because the problem was data sharing. Blockchain is a way by which you provide the data that you have at the time, and that's what goes onto that blockchain. So it might not be the best policy, but it is the best we've got. And it is much better to use the data than to have the data hiding in the back of siloed systems where it never sees the light of day. So it's not a perfect system, and it isn't the only way to solve the problem. But it is the only feasible way to solve the problem today.
But we, of course, need to achieve uniformity of data. The garbage in, garbage out, probably want to avoid that. And
so I think that we're talking about a big continuum. There's garbage in, garbage out. But where data isn't garbage, but it isn't perfect, I'm a big advocate of using the data that you've got, particularly if you've collected it in line with some recognised standards. Because data that has been collected in line with recognised standards and is the best that's available means that the benefits of that technology are much more accessible to everybody, not only the people who can afford the best system. And I think this is really important in realising some of those sustainable development goals. We're not saying that you have to buy X and do Y to make access to this market a possibility. We're saying these are the standards that you have to meet, and you can use free technology, you can use really low entry cost technology, but provided you meet those standards and you demonstrate that you meet those standards, then this is somewhere where you can join in and realise the benefits. So I think that's really, really important. The standards that I'm talking about are quite a bit different from the GS1 standards. So there's a place across that continuum for standards too. The standards I was talking about are standards that are really specific to the conditions that the UK measure in those animals at slaughter. They're going to be different across all the European countries, but there is a requirement in the legislation to collect them. So it's using something that people have to do to provide an example of how this might work in other areas in the future.
so that's what we're talking. That's where we are right now, talking about how things might work, right? And there are examples from individual countries. We're talking about the European Union, where there's a lot of policy coordination going on within that system. We're not talking about the global environment, not even beginning to talk about what's going on in sub-Saharan Africa or the different parts of the developing world in Asia, how these technologies are going to become accessible, and we're going to develop a technology chain without gaps in it, the way that Herman was talking, because that would bring the whole house down. So I'm just wondering, from a governance perspective, because you've given the example of the UK, we're sitting here in Germany, a rich country in Northern Europe with massive resources in research and whatnot, also playing an important role within the European Union. But we have an audience here that represents different parts of the world. I've just looked through the people who signed up for this conference. There are over 70 countries represented there. When we talk about governance and coming up with models and visions that are going to allow us to apply digital technologies in a way that is going to benefit everyone, what sort of challenges does this present to governments? You can use examples from within the European Union or on a larger scale. How are governments going to deal with this challenge? What sort of challenge does it present to the governments? How can governments play a positive role in making sure this rolls out in a way that benefits everyone?
Okay, I'm taking this question even though I'm not a government expert, but again, answering it from a perspective of an engineer and what I have seen and learned in different international conferences in the last year. I think one key factor is education, and not, like you just said, mandatory setting one technology, but setting the information that needs to be transported, and be it on a sheet of paper or by mouth-to-mouth propagation or blockchain, that shouldn't be defined by the government. But the governments need to look into educating their farming and food producing people out there. And education means completely different levels. If we talk about educating our farmers here in Germany, we talk about yet another training course on using digital techniques and how to ease up your life typing in data or using your autonomously steered farming robot. So if we talk about education as an example in rural China, we're talking about teaching people how to read and write. So globally, this is a completely different topic, and we need to make sure that we fill the gaps with the options that we have in the locations that we're at. So filling a gap could mean we are allowing somebody to type it in his text message and somehow import it into a blockchain technology that is in place otherwise.
Okay, unfortunately we don't have a lot of time. I do want to get some questions in from the audience. I'm going to quick bring in Diane and then Siobhan.
Yeah. Just to make sure we mention the word real time. You know, digitalization means a lot that we are talking about real access to the information. This has application for food safety management, risk management, waste reduction opportunities, and also, of course, to give information to the consumer. If you're in front of the consumer, he wants to know where a fish comes from. Okay, maybe this is always the same origin, but probably it's not. Okay, and you cannot tell him, wait, come back in 2 hours, and I will tell you. You know, so it's different for this type of application. Now, this works. Some are already doing it. You know, you can get this information real time. I mean, of course, if it's on the label, of course you have it. But if it's not, still you can do it today in some cases. But it works if the fishermen or if the one upstream are connected. And now to echo, in the end, what you were saying, what others already mentioned. And I remember last year I was speaking in a WTO event, and I won't mention which country, but there was the Ministry of Agriculture, a Minister of Agriculture, who said, all the farmers today have smartphones. You know, and he was so, he felt so clever, he was saying that But that's not true. I mean, I'm dealing with countries all over the world who are dealing with farmers that even don't know how to reach them, so they work with with associations, whatever, to reach them in the jungle, in the mountains, everywhere. They don't have even phones, right?
These gaps are everywhere, even in Germany, by the way.
Exactly. We had a low-tech initiative. We started to talk about low-tech, and the US, every European country said it's also for us, because we also have companies who don't have computers, or think about food banks, or they
mobile
don't.
phone access.
US, they don't have a phone, like access to the like telecommunication things everywhere, So inclusion, that was to your thing. Government can help with inclusion. There are nice initiatives everywhere as well. In South Africa, where they help, it was more like a project, a pilot, but to help the poorest farmer to have traceability by having some hubs where they would collect the data. In Peru, where they train the poorest sesame producers in the mountains first to know what is the process, even just writing by hand, as a first step to go to more digitalized tool. Trainings in Asia with the Asian Development Banks.
There's a lot connected with this in order to roll it out in a way that benefits everyone. Shivani, last word before we open up the floor.
Yeah, I think governments have really a critical role to play, and I think it's true, your point of inclusive economic growth, particularly in the agri-sector. That includes rural development, promoting rural development, because that's where we have a number of the issues, and linked again back to food security, which links then again to land use. So this, and sustainable land use. Just in terms of technology, it's interesting. I had a conversation yesterday with one of a DLT group working with artisanal miners in Rwanda, actually, where they're using handheld applications of phones to take photos of RFID tags and then link it up. And it's interesting. So the technology is blooming. It's coming out there. All of these are still, concepts, ideas being tested. I think governments have a role to keep track of what is happening, what is going on. They shouldn't regulate. Governments are probably the least equipped to regulate on the technological side of things. But they have a role to play in understanding. I mean, do we as consumers and as citizens, frankly, do we want our data and our information to be held then by the private sector?
Oh, another big can of worms.
Another big can of worms. So, I think vote, make sure that your governments are asking these questions and are playing a role in staying abreast of the game, not necessarily ahead of the game, because that's going to be very difficult. I think they need to support companies in technology, but governments have certainly a very important role to keep track of what's happening. And I suppose you will let us have a final.
I would really want to get a word from the let some people get some input from the audience. We only have a few minutes left, unfortunately, and I get the feeling we could just continue this conversation. So I see a number of hands. I've seen one here towards the front. Yeah, it's kind of hard for us to see. So the gentleman there, yeah, and other hands. People like to ask questions. I see one in the far back towards the window. I'll be second.
Thank you very much. My name is Frank Herrmann, working with the Federal Ministry of Food and Agriculture here in Germany. My question is addressed more or less to the OECD. We are talking about blockchain and transparency and personal related data along the international blockchains. And my question is, there is a guideline in place since the year of 1980 of the OECD protecting personal rights of human beings and dealing with them internationally. And I think my question is, isn't there a strong need to evaluate this guideline if we are talking about international rules and international government? Thank you.
You're right. I mean, we definitely have a lot of different standards out there, and we should actually update different standards particularly when it comes to technology and the implications and ramifications that technology can have on it. Just want to announce as well that actually the OECD just this year, so a few days ago, there was agreement to create and the name is called Blockchain Policy Center, but frankly, as Sharon said, I'm not necessarily sure that it's going to be blockchain, but the idea is that we will bring together a hub where we can discuss with our member governments, of which Germany is one, obviously a strong one, the questions and the ramifications, the implications of this technology on a range of issues. So that will be the hub that will be coordinating the discussions on technology, DLT technology, and as I said, right now it's a short form is the blockchain technology.
Great. The gentleman near the window. And other questions? Did I see a hand in the center here somewhere? No?
Thank you very much for this fruitful presentation and seminars. I want to...
Could you just identify yourself?
I am Professor Hussam Sayour. I'm from Egypt. I'm the deputy of the head of the delegate of Mr. His Excellency, the Minister of Egyptian Agriculture. I'm working on this topic since 2011, working as a researcher with the engineering faculty of engineering in Egypt to make much models, much prototypes. I think the research is the most important for promoting the food chain by digital technology. I have many prototypes for this, for fish farming and for milk products control. And as the food chain learns us from the farm to the fork. So I think our engineer is very pessimistic, and on the right she's very optimistic. I agree with her that she's very optimistic, and I'm so optimistic that tomorrow will be much better in this technology, and it should be goes to the farmers through software first, then we can train them for using the hardware. This is a comment, not a question, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have time maybe for one more question. Gentleman here in the front. Maybe we can just bring him the microphone. That'd be great.
Thank you very much. My name is Vincent Vandel, and I work for Deloitte Sustainability. And I just wondered, we talked a lot about efficiency, and on the other hand, I would like to emphasize the need for talking about freshness, because Diane, you mentioned it, food waste. If we look at the impact, 40% of all food is wasted, and we talk about the sustainable development goals, poverty, and we want to feed the world. We talk about climate change. We talk about the use of fresh water and land use, and if you look at the impact of food waste, it's so massive, and this is just what I want to emphasize, and the need for also including consumers, consumer-facing businesses in this discussion, that we look at the whole chain and not that we get the better technology for just the production side, but also at the end that the food is not wasted.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm afraid we are out of time. I don't know if we have time to go 5 minutes over or not, but do we have time? Do we have time or not to continue for a little bit? Yeah. Okay. Then we'll go to the feed. Okay. Then we'll take. Is there another question from the audience? If not, okay. Apparently there is one. It's hard to see from where I am. There is another question there. The young lady near right here. If we could get this microphone to her, wonderful.
My name is Alicia Lukman, and I have a question to Shivani Kanaphiran.
Sorry, your name and affiliation, I didn't catch it. Where are you from? If you could stand up.
I'm from Russia, and my name is Alicia Lukman, and I have a question to Shivani Kanaphiran.
Okay.
I just once heard about smart contract. You are the one who has mentioned it. And right now in Germany, such a very rich country, we have platforms like Next Farming or 365 FarmNet, which allow farmers to put information how do they produce, their food. Next step maybe for those farmers who were good in terms of policy would be to sell at a really reasonable price their products. And smart farming could afford farmers all over the world to have access, to get good money for their product, which they created in a very good way, and it's transferable. My question is, why do you think in no one country, at least case, was a platform invented which should, allow to every single farmer, doesn't matter if it's a big farmer or a small farmer, to have access, via application, to that smart contracts,
I think the these ideas are happening in other sectors, for example. I do know, I have actually, funnily enough, a friend of mine who's in Singapore, who's working on, and it's interesting to see where these ideas are coming from. You know, the ideas in technology in particular, it's easy to say the leapfrogging aspect, but it really is amazing to see some of the innovative ideas coming out from countries in Southeast Asia, for example, or even in China. So there I think the idea is to bring folks together, again, like a platform, and then establishing, and this is what's interesting with something like a DLT, where you put data in, and then it's a level of building the trust in a way in the system. But there's still many issues. As I said earlier, these are still pioneering technologies. What I've seen working today still, it tends to be closed permission-based systems. So the energy use is a lot lower, for example. When you have public permission systems, the energy use is so out of whack that you just think this is not really that useful. So again, at the OECD, the work on our team that we're doing is that we're really trying to keep track of this. We're looking at researchers collecting the data. I'm so pleased now that we do have this policy center, because we need to have a home to bring these things, and this is useful as well, because with our member governments, we can then begin to actually convene discussions. And of course, the OECD is international, so we work a lot with a lot of key partners, as well as countries like Russia as well. So there's really room to move the discussion in a way that that is both thoughtful but also informed. And I think that's very important. So I don't have really a direct answer.
Sure. I think it's also really important that we use open technology. So there are blockchain type platforms that are built on open technology. It's not so much whether they're permissioned. They're permissioned so that commercial information is maintained securely, not to prevent people from seeing the data. They can be used freely by anyone. We're just embarking on another pilot to test certification and smart contracts for export. It's something that I can give you my contact details if you're interested in following up.
Emma, did you want to add something? I can.
Yeah, just 2 points. I think that was one thing I also wanted to mention. I mean, open technology, open source developments, I think that is emerging in many sectors, and it's really, really important and also very promising. And the other thing, which we haven't talked much about, is about this issue of data ownership, data as a resource and as a currency. I mean, we should data has value, correct? And many of these technologies only work if the data which are collected and generated are actually widely used by the partners in the chain. But this also means that these data have a value, and my feeling is we are in a huge experimental phase. These things develop so fast, and governments, you asked about the role of governments, my feeling is that governments are experimenting with how to deal with this. I mean, recently we had this issue with the European Data Protection Directive. I think that was quite instructive. Every one of us in Europe was kind of flooded with emails. You had to agree, but I think it raised the awareness that some things are going on, and the question: do we really want huge private companies, in effect, then owning these data? I think we are at very early stages. But if we raise all these data in the future from these technologies, we cannot avoid this. And it's about educating the people, but it's also about proper regulation. And my hope, without knowing much about it, is that, for example, the OECD could play a very important role in generating joint or shared visions on this in the policy area. But I think it's a huge challenge.
Thank you so much. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. We're about 6 minutes or so over, and I know some people have other appointments to go to. It's been a wonderful discussion. I've really enjoyed it. I'm afraid we didn't get to touch on as much as we would like to. It's always the case in situations like this. I would like to have spent a little more time talking about research. Maybe we did get into the policy a bit, but we did talk about new technologies, promising technologies coming online. We did talk about the gaps. We did get some input from the audience, very happy about that. There are a lot of other discussions and seminars going on here at the GFFA 2019 that will allow you to explore some of these topics in greater depth. I hope we'll have the opportunity to meet again and to do something like this, perhaps over a longer period of time and broken up into more manageable chunks. But it's been great having you all. Thank you. I want to thank all of our all of our speakers today. I'm not going to go through all their names. You can see them up there, but thank you. A warm round of applause for